last-minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
what's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the NASM Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, IFBB Physique Olympian and NASM Master Trainer. Today's topic is going to be all about avoiding the post-show rebound. And no better time of year than right now, heading into the holidays, kind of finishing out the year, getting ready to kick off that new year. Competition season has come to an end. And I'm going to break down my thoughts on how to best manage your post-competition phase to really avoid that unwanted body fat and weight gain. And it's a compounding effect, right? Especially with those holidays around the corner. So I'll highlight some of the best practices that I recommend for proper reverse dieting, deloading, supplementation, blood work, and detoxification to make sure we set you up for a successful 2025 or future season. I'm going to first start by defining what is a post-show rebound. Some of you guys that are active competitors, longtime competitors, have probably experienced this to some degree, or if you coach athletes, you've certainly seen this to some degree. And really, it's about that unwanted body weight and fat gain post-show, right? So this can come from a multitude of things, which I'll do a deep dive on as we go throughout this podcast. But the big things that I really want to hit on are going to be things like that metabolic crash, hormonal crash, chronic fatigue, inflammation, insomnia, right? So disruption with sleep patterns and even cortisol patterns, circadian rhythm patterns, insulin resistance, which 99% of every athlete on this planet will have some degree of insulin resistance after difficult prep. And then even things like adrenal fatigue or metabolic damage, which are, further down the road. But these are the types of things that we're talking about when we define what that post-show rebound looks like. And in addition to that, we're not just talking physiological changes. We're also talking about behavioral eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and all the other stuff that comes along with the post-competition phase, right? Oftentimes we tend to think too much about just the physical part of competition prep. And really, we have to make sure that we're also addressing and nourishing that emotional part of competition and post-competition prep. And one thing I'll say, as you're coming out of your season, definitely try to get some sort of body composition scan in, be it an in-body scan, a DEXA scan, or what have you. But it's always good to record your baselines. For me personally, I actually try to avoid it on peak week for multiple reasons. In an ideal world, we'd get an in-body scan the morning we step on stage. But the reality is with manipulations in water and glycogen and depletion, it's not going to be the most accurate reading. And if it doesn't show where you expect it to show, it can really cause some unwanted stress and really throw your mind out of whack heading into your show. So for me, if I did one on peak week personally, I probably wouldn't review it until after the show. But I think it's more appropriate and going to be a bit more accurate doing it, let's say the Monday or Tuesday after the show. You're still good and lean. You've filled back out, rehydrated post-show, and it should be a pretty accurate snapshot. That's going to really lay the baselines and framework for your reverse dieting phase, right? Now, second thing we'll talk about is going to be really just recapping that overview of an example competition season, right? So for a lot of people that are maybe newer to the sport, when we're going throughout the course of a competition prep, it's going to be one of the most challenging things you've done. There's a lot of physical, emotional stress, hormonal stress. We're stressing the body through weights. We're stressing the body through the psychology of the intensity of the training, as well as our internal organ systems, right? We're putting a lot of undue stress on them, be it extreme dieting at times, or supplementation, if there's exogenous hormones involved, for instance. So there's a lot of systems throughout our body that are really under a lot of stress, and that's what we're trying to really talk about during competition season, right? Because we need to address these things in the off season, or as I like to say, the improvement season, to set up a successful, next season. Now, when we're in that competition season, typically you're going to be at a caloric deficit for many months, right? This could be 2 to 3 months. It could be, 3 to 5 months. All depends on your starting point, your coaching strategy, and really what that physique outcome you're trying to achieve is. During that time, you're also going to be experiencing high amounts of inputs. So high amounts of cardio and training inputs that generally will get progressed over time as you get closer to the show, in order to really harden up the physique and achieve that fat-free lean mass, or what we would call stage conditioning. Other things that tend to get titrated up over time would be supplementation, be it, daily health supplements to maintain and keep the body functioning at a high level. If you're using any type of hormone support, oftentimes these things will get titrated up over the course of a prep as well, including things like fat burners, right? So a lot of times, if we're a little bit behind down that home stretch, your cardio and your fat burning capacity needs to increase in order to hit that stage conditioning. So you can already sort of get the gist of all the high inputs and stress that's going into this competition prep. And it's really going to take a toll on your body at the end of that. But there's things we can implement proactively to help better manage that, on the back end of your competition season. So during the season also, there's really less attention on balance, right? Tim Grover once said that, if you think about winning, right? Winning is not a sprint, winning is not just a marathon, but it's an all-out sprint all the time, right? And it's really hard to stay balanced because really that balance is that sprint at 110% speed all the way past the finish line when you want to win something as competitive and as challenging as a bodybuilding show, especially at the pro level. Now, again, less attention on that balance, a little bit less focus on overall health and biomarkers. Even if you're familiar with things that maybe are outliers in your blood work, or you're feeling a bit of fatigue or chronic muscle soreness, there are certainly signs that we can monitor. But when you're getting really close to a show, and it's a very important show for you, a lot of times these things kind of get set off to the side, for better or for worse. That's just the reality of competing in a sport as difficult as bodybuilding. And there's more focus on achieving the physique outcome, especially because the criteria is so specific to each division, right? So we start to brush aside some of these things temporarily in order to achieve a very specific physique outcome. So that's the reality of competition season. Now, coming out of that season, again, the whole goal is how can we mitigate some of the rebound effects, be it hormones, body fat, body weight gain, right? So the first thing I like to do is implement a post-show training deload. Now, if you guys have been tuning into the Peak Physique podcast for a while now, you've heard me touch on peak week methodologies, different approaches and strategies. And in general, I like to begin reducing some of those inputs 10 to 14 days out when possible. Not always going to be possible, depending on how your body responds and if you're able to get stage lean, let's say 2 to 4 weeks out from your show. Some people have to play catch up all the way through a couple days out from the show. But in a perfect world, we've already begun the deloading process on peak week. Training intensities, volumes have come down, let's say 25 to 30%. Your cardio inputs have dropped 5 to 10 minutes a day, all the way going into the show. So you've begun this deloading process. This is going to help you really reduce inflammation in the body. HSCRV, we talked a little bit on previous podcasts on some of those biomarkers for inflammation, right? Inflammatory markers that we can monitor. But just in general, the way your body feels, right? We want to help alleviate some of that chronic muscle soreness and fatigue. Joints can definitely take a toll throughout prep. So post-show, I like to go at least a full week, sometimes 2 weeks if you've had a really difficult prep, of really just deloading our training Sometimes it's no training at all. We might do some cardio, stretching, corrective exercise, do a lot of body work, like soft tissue work, things like this. Or if your body feels great, we can keep you moving, but we might reduce your training volumes by 50%. And maybe you're only training 3 days this week in a lighter phase, like stabilization or strength endurance, versus, extreme hypertrophy and things like this, where we're really focusing on building muscle. We're really deloading, okay? Incorporating recovery and detoxification strategy is going to be very important. It's an integral part post-show. So again, we are trying to recover the body, things like massage, salt baths, specifically Epsom salt baths. You can do a bit of contrast therapy, right, where we're shocking that parasympathetic nervous system. I like to go infrared sauna. Personally, I like to go about 20 minutes at 135 degrees F, and then go directly either into a cold plunge or a very cold shower, as cold as you can tolerate, and try to hold that for, 5 to 7 minutes or something like this. That's going to be great, again, at just inflammation reduction, and then also helping to improve your mental state too, right? And really boost up the parasympathetic, so more dopamine, serotonin, all the good, happy hormones being released, and we start to mitigate some of that anxiety. Dry brushing is also great for detoxification. And then the body work, right? So we're talking about things like chiropractic work, soft tissue scraping, or Groston, we would call it, cupping, dry needling. All these things can help really contribute to proper recovery and deload strategies. Now, once we get through that deload, of course, we're going to get back to training because it's the off season, right? We've got goals. So if I look at my own contest preps this year, you guys seen me come out of Tokyo and Kazakhstan and really travel all over the world this year with some pretty challenging preps. And it's been a few years for me, so I'm a little bit older now. The body doesn't recover as quickly as it used to. So I actually incorporated most of these strategies throughout my entire prep. Every 2 weeks, I do IV drip therapy for recovery and detoxification and rejuvenation. High level, some of the things that I implement there, which you can also do post-show, would be things like glutathione, vitamin C, B complex, aminos, electrolytes, NAC, right? N-acetylcysteine for detoxification. Again, we're really trying to hit first and second pass of the liver and kidney, make sure kidney functions good, keep an eye on your blood pressure. And then also, things that help reset the body at the cellular level, like NAD plus is another great one that I like to add into my IV drips. So, it can get a little expensive, but if you can afford it and budget for it, post-show, I would highly recommend getting at least 1 or 2 IV drips over that first month. It's going to help detox, flush the body out, and just help you feel more refreshed and rejuvenated. And then again, just really keeping the liver and kidneys also functioning at a very high level. So those are some of my favorites for sure. Some of the big issues that, you're going to run into, and we'll address these a little bit more as we go throughout this podcast, but things like insulin resistance, adrenal fatigue, thyroid dysfunction, these are most of the areas where we'll see athletes coming out of prep have the biggest challenges. If you guys are just joining us, welcome to another exciting episode of the Peak Physique Podcast. We are talking about all the best practices and strategies to help avoid that post-show rebound. So we've talked about some of the physical things we can do with training deloads and help, really just define what that post-show rebound consists of. And the next thing I want to touch on is really nutrition. This is going to be one of the most challenging parts because remember, you've been prepping all year long. You're hungry. You've been dreaming about those pancakes and cheeseburgers and pizzas and whatever else might have been on your wish list during competition prep. And this is where discipline and self-control is going to really come into play. Because as a coach, you can prescribe the best nutrition reverse diet on the planet. But as the athlete, you guys have to stay disciplined enough to follow it. So my coaching strategy, and this comes from a combination of the theory side of it, right? But also from the experiential side of me also being an athlete for the last 15 years. I understand. I can relate to you guys. So it's hard to manage those cravings, but there are some different strategies that I use. I like to, for one, bring our calories back up to maintenance that first 2 weeks coming out of the show. the same way that we slowly started to decrease calories going into the show, we're going to reverse that process and slowly start to increase the calories, maybe 5 to 10% every 2 to 3 weeks. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. You can adjust that number up or down as needed. Initially, it's really just adding back in typically some carbohydrates. Proteins stay relatively constant. And as we start to progress that, I definitely like to add in more healthy fats, especially for the women, because we'll talk more about it in a second, but females tend to get a bit of hypothalamic amenorrhea, right? For, let's just say, 3 or more consecutive periods that could be missed due to a number of things, from hormonal support to just being too lean to, have the regular menses. So I like to add in some carbs. We talk about, really putting them around, structure those around your workout times, and then start to kind of feather in some healthy fats here and there, especially, maybe with breakfast or before bed, when we want to really slow down digestion a bit. So that's the first thing I do, is look at bring the calories up at least to maintenance. Generally, that's going to be somewhere between 500 to 1,000 calories above where you were at the end of prep. Or you could just recalculate the client's BMR and TDEE, total daily energy expenditure, and just set them right there at that maintenance level. Now, remember, you also have to account for the fact that we just reduced their training and cardio inputs. So if they were previously working out 6 days a week, doing cardio 5 to 7 days a week, but now they're only doing cardio 3 days a week for 20 minutes and training 4 to 5 days a week, we have to account for that in their total daily energy expenditure. So set the baseline calories right back to maintenance those first couple of weeks. Slow and steady is the key. Now, I like to build in more flexibility for their diet post-show, but keep the overall framework the same, right? You want that consistency there. So if you go way off the walls and it's just like, hey, here's just your total calories for the day, that's not going to do anybody any good, right? You could cram all those calories into 2 enormous meals a day, and then your nutrient partitioning, your nutrient timing, macro types, all that's going to be off, and your body's not used to that. Your body's been prepping with, anywhere from 4 to 6 healthy meals, structured meals a day. So you want to keep that same framework as you're reversing out. A few other tips that I like to add in, these are just my personal tips, is as you're starting to increase those calories, be cautious of foods that might disrupt the GI. In particular, uncooked vegetables or high fibrous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, red onion, things like this that are definitely prone to gas and bloat. That's going to really throw off your post-show progress. And, just pay attention if there's specific foods that you have not had in a very long time, slowly reintroduce them, right? You don't want to just throw in, let's just say you haven't had beef all prep and you've been, prepping on chicken and fish primarily, and all of a sudden you have 3 beef meals a day. That can really throw your gut out of whack. So make sure you phase any of those new foods back in a little bit slower. And again, it's called a reverse diet for a reason, right? The same way we slowly took some of these things out, we're going to slowly phase them back in. Definitely for the emotional part, right? To avoid some of the behavioral eating challenges, give yourself flexible options. I try to encourage a variety of different color fruits and veggies, a variety of different protein sources. This is all going to help rebalance a healthy gut microbiome. And emotionally, it's going to give you enough variety in your diet where you're not craving some of these extreme things. And to that same point, I also like to build in 1 to 2 good refeed meals. You can call them cheat meals if you want, per week. That's going to also just mentally help you just stay focused and stay disciplined on plan without binge eating later on. So we can do this as long as these are planned, structured meals. Me personally, I would take those with GDA or berberine, or even something like metformin to help slow the assimilation and make sure that your body's actually using the glucose and the extra fats and things like this in the most optimal manner. So recap on that is just bringing those calories up to maintenance and then progress them up 5 to 10% every few weeks based on progress. Encouraging that variety of different color fruits, veggies, protein sources, etc., and really just focusing on balancing your GI. Now, blood work and HTMA. So you guys have probably seen a previous episode with myself and some of my partners like Dr. Indy Vasquez and Drew Velasco, right? She's one of my medical partners here locally. If you haven't, highly encourage you to go back and watch those episodes on blood work and the HTMA mineral analysis. There's some really cool things that you can take away and apply to your prep or your athletes. Coming out of a show, definitely want to wait a couple weeks for blood work and HTMA. Don't do it Monday after your show. I can guarantee you your numbers are going to be all over the place, and you can actually make some misinformed decision based off of, erroneous data. So wait anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks typically. Really focus on pushing hydration, keeping your system flushed, detoxification. If you are on exogenous hormones, you want to give your body a chance to just get rid of, some of the erroneously high levels. If you're in a super physiological state of testosterone, for instance, right? And then again, give your body a few weeks to really flush out the liver, kidney enzymes, things like AST, ALT on your blood work, right? Cholesterol, lipids, triglycerides. We want to get these numbers back to a more realistic range to see that snapshot of where you're at. And now is the time to really focus on resetting the body. You can't do it during the middle of a competition prep, as we just talked about, because some of the things we might need to implement to correct, let's say, a specific biomarker on your blood work might cause the physique to respond in a different manner. So a lot of times we know what these things are and we have to manage them on prep, but now's your time to really reset the body completely. So review for outliers in blood work. We're going to address these through nutraceuticals or lifestyle changes on an as needed basis, right? If we identify things like, high RBC, red blood cell count is too high, hemoglobin's too high, MCHV, things like this, if we recognize any thickening of the blood, there might be different things we implement, such as a blood donation or nutraceuticals, the right types of changes in our diet, and just recalibrating the diet to support rebalancing the body here. The next thing we're going to look for, in addition to blood work, these are complementary, is going to be that mineral imbalance that will show up on that hair tissue mineral analysis. And things that we like to address would be key areas such as insulin resistance. Again, 99% of athletes are going to experience some level of this. Adrenal fatigue. Some people actually might have cortisol issues. So I do like to consider additional testing, such as a 4-point Dutch test for cortisol, to delineate if the adrenals are functioning at a high level or if we are just producing too much or too little cortisol or at the wrong time of day. So we do want to delineate if it's true adrenal fatigue or metabolic damage, or do we have issues with cortisol production? So many different ways to address this. Thyroid dysfunction, another big one. If you, just from prepping in itself, right, just the physical stress of prep can tend to throw some of these labs and levels out of whack, like TSH, right, thyroid stimulating hormone, T3, T4. Sometimes the lack of variety in your diet can also contribute. But oftentimes we're taking, high stimulant, things like fat burners, clenbuterol, there's, T3 or thyroxine, right? There's different things that are implemented at times. And these are things that as a coach, you need to be prepared for, because you're going to have to ultimately address these with the athlete at some point, right? So making sure that the thyroid is functioning at a high level, check for antibodies. And again, if they are not functioning the way they should be, they're not optimal, that's your opportunity to improve, reset for overall health, longevity, and then of course, performance in that subsequent season. Another common one that we touched on lightly, I want to elaborate on more here, is hypothalamic amenorrhea in females. Again, most coaches, I think in the industry, it's become just kind of, it gets overlooked, let's say, right? It's become so common that a lot of even athletes will say, oh, well, it's normal. The reality is it can be common, but common doesn't necessarily mean normal. And we should still be looking at addressing these things. So rebalancing the hormones. If you go back and watch some of the blood work and even testosterone for females episode I recorded on Peak Physique Podcast a while back, I talk about the specific levels that as a coach, I like to see our female athletes in, right? If we're looking 7 days out from that next expected period, and if you haven't had one, you're just going to arbitrarily pick a date, do your blood work. but we like to see testosterone somewhere between 50 to 75 nanogram per deciliter. And we like to see a 10-to-1 ratio, step-down ratio of E2 or estradiol to progesterone, right? With those numbers being, let's say, E2 in that 40 to 230 range, progesterone being 4 to 23 nanogram per deciliter range. So those are the values we're really looking at. And if these values are way off and the athlete is experiencing any amenorrhea or PCOS or any of these other symptoms, there's definitely some nutraceutical therapies that we can implement through, over-the-counter natural supplements to help rebalance these things. A few of my favorites would be things like chasteberry extract, rhodiola rosea, ashwagandha, evening primrose oil, DIM. There's a whole host of things that we can implement to correct these. And again, sometimes you don't have a full off season. You might have 8 weeks to try and correct these. Every athlete's body is different. Some snap back in 30 days as soon as they start reintroducing healthy fats into the diet. And others, it might take 6 months, right? Or longer. So this is something that you need to work with and be well versed on to help identify and address these issues with your female athletes. Common corrective supplements to address some of those issues, those specific issues we just talked about. I love me some GDA and berberine. You guys hear me talk about it quite often. You see me wearing the First Form shirt, of course. Actually, their GDA product is one of the best on the planet. I've been using it for over 10 years myself, on and off. But you're going to get that full 500 mgs of berberine. And in addition to that, there's other things like chromium and ALA and things that are going to help really just optimize glucose disposal in the body and also push those carbs into the muscles, right? So you're crossing that barrier and pushing it into the muscles. And then, of course, we're inhibiting some lipids and carbohydrate storage as fat in the small intestines by slowing down, the assimilation rate, which is very important. So you can really get creative with the timing here, but the most important takeaway there is that we are increasing insulin sensitivity to be able to optimize glucose disposal. Chromium by itself can also be taken. Myoinositol or inositol and choline. All these things are great for supporting metabolism, glucose, and fatty acid disposal. Omega-3s for sure. Guys and girls, this is going to help with your cholesterol. Any athletes that are genetically predisposed to cholesterol imbalance, or if there's exogenous hormones, specifically DHT or dihydrotestosterone derivative compounds being employed during prep, I can guarantee you on your blood work, your cholesterol is going to be imbalanced. Generally speaking, HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, is lower than normal, and then we'll start to see a slow rise in the LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol. So some things that can help out there, B3 niacin, you can do citrus bergamot, you can do CoQ10, things like this to help manage down the LDL, and then employ more omega-3. This can come from fish oil or from whole food sources to help just optimize that, total cholesterol and that ratio. We talked about most of these detox therapies, but I'll reiterate them here. Some of my favorites would be glutathione, always going to be top for liver cleanse and also going to be beneficial for the kidneys. Zinc, NAC, N-acetylcysteine, vitamin C. If you don't have any issues with with copper and things like that, you can employ the vitamin C as well. Prebiotics are actually great as well. Probiotics can also be good too, but not everyone maybe benefits the same. So we tend to steer more towards the prebiotics and fibers, or if you're going to go the probiotic route, consider things like, Greek yogurt and things like this from your whole food sources. Vitamin D and K2, also some of my favorites, even my own. We'll use myself as the example. Coming out of my competition season here, last week, I actually had my blood work done. And even though my vitamin D was in a good range, it was what I would call subclinical, towards the bottom end of the spectrum. And it's wintertime here in good old Wisconsin. So you guys got to remember, it's cold. There's less hours of sunlight per day. And we're certainly not outside as many hours per day. So increasing your vitamin D. And then the reason that we add K2 and even magnesium is to help with activation and absorption. So we really want to combine these. It's also going to boost up your immune system. And we want to optimize all these levels in the off season. Also going to help you just, again, avoid the post-show rebound and just really set yourself up for a successful next season. And then, of course, if you guys were taking any types of hormones or hormone support, we're going to have to employ a post-cycle strategy. And that's very specific to the individual based on their needs and where their baseline hormones are at, which will show up on your blood work and your HTMA. Overall, guys, when we're thinking about avoiding the post-show rebound and really just maintaining that structure and that framework to set yourself up for a very productive and sustainable, that's very important, right? Sustainable off season. We want to focus on those nutrition strategies that we just talked about, overall health and wellness that we just talked about. And then again, with training, you can get back to progressing that training over time, but consider working through the OPT phases. Don't be afraid. And, everyone, when they see the hardcore bodybuilders, they only think about lifting super heavy weights, right? You guys see one of my good buddies in the industry. You may or may not have heard of him, right? 8-time Mr. Olympia, Ronnie Coleman, who was just here at my house last week for our Legend seminar. And we think about that kind of training, right? Super heavy, or in Ronnie's case, lightweight training. The reality is we like to go through some of those stabilization phases. I like to spend the first anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks during that initial deload going through also corrective exercise. If there is an imbalance, muscle imbalance from prep, if you have a lagging body part that you're trying to develop faster than the rest, these are the times to employ things like your corrective exercise. This can be integrated into your warm-ups during your normal workouts, or if you have the time, for me, I might drop my hypertrophy training to 3 days a week and then do 2 days of corrective exercise to focus on bringing up those lagging areas, my body mechanics, joint action, all these things, just really optimizing my performance. So don't be afraid to go back down to those initial OPT phases, build up. Strength endurance is also going to be a great one to progress into to help build up your foundation, right? That's going to really set your work capacity to allow you to do heavier loads and, longer workouts once you get back to your hypertrophy or your max strength. So cycling through those OPT models and then deload the inflammation or schedule your deloads on an as needed basis. Good rule of thumb in the off season is going to be around every 8 weeks or so. So if you've been training hard for 6, 7, 8 weeks, schedule maybe a 4 to 7 day deload. And then you're going to, really, again, just sometimes it's wash, rinse, repeat, or sometimes you might be going straight into another prep. But just try to map out, when you're looking at that macro plan, appropriate deloads from your training phase to manage your inflammation as you progress back into your hypertrophy training for those specific physique goals. Guys, that's all I have for you today on how to best manage your post-show rebound and avoiding that rebound. But if you guys are struggling with something in particular, highly encourage you, reach out directly to me. You can contact me online at Andre Adams Official on Instagram and YouTube, by email at trainingbydre@gmail.com. And I've actually got 2 websites now. Our main one is andreadamsofficial.com. And we just launched a brand new one, which is teamadamsprep.com. So you can ask me questions there. You can set up a free consultation, and we can talk about your own post-show strategies to keep you guys progressing and set you up for a successful next season. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, signing off.